Hello, I am the Story Girl, and welcome to the story of the White Snake. Spoiler! Even though the title of the story is The White Snake, there is not a big creepy snake in this story that you need to be afraid of. It's a nice story, don't be worried. There once was a king that everybody in the kingdom, and people outside the kingdom too, agreed was very wise, extremely wise about everything. It's as though he had ears all over the kingdom. It's as though he had studied every book. It's as though he had spoken to every single wise woman in the world. How could he know so much? This king had a peculiar custom that he did every single night. He had his most trusted servant bring him a covered dish. After the servant brought the covered dish, the servant would leave. Even the servant who brought the dish didn't know what was under the cover, because the king only opened it after the servant had left. The king would do whatever he did with this covered dish, and then the servant would come back in, pick it up, and leave. One night, this servant became curious. What could be underneath that covered dish? He picked it up, just like always, and took it away from the king. But before he'd gotten to the special cupboard where it was always kept, he took a peek. What he saw was a white snake. A white snake just sitting there. And he saw that the king had been slowly eating this white snake night after night. What could be so important about this snake? Thought the servant. And he put his fingers in and he grabbed off a piece, put it in his mouth, and put the cover back on, took it to the cupboard and put it away. But as he was walking back to his room, he heard something he'd never heard before. A sort of whooshing and muttering sound. He listened closer. He went closer to the sound. It was coming out the window. He opened the window and found that he could understand the speech of the birds outside the window. They were speaking as though it was plain human tongue. The white snake gives the person who eats it the ability to understand the language of all animals. It just so happens that the very next day, this trusted servant was called in before the king. Not because he was suspicious about the white snake, but because his wife, the king's wife, the queen, was missing a very precious ring that she always wore on her finger. And this trusted servant was the only one with the key to the cabinet where it was locked up. Obviously, it must have been him that stole this ring. The queen only had about 100 rings, and she couldn't be without a single one of them. Well, the servant pleaded, and the servant begged, and the servant gave proofs that it certainly wasn't him that stole the ring, but the king didn't believe it. You have until this evening to produce the ring, or... And when he meant the servant would be executed. The servant hurried about the castle, talking to other servants, trying to find what could have happened to the ring, but to no avail. Nobody had heard a thing about it. He went out into the castle courtyard and sat gloomily by the fountain. When he happened over here, a conversation happening between two ducks who were floating in the fountain. Well, I was just thinking, I was eating some excellent lunch, and there was all of this fruit that was underneath the queen's window. Yes. You're always talking about fruit, Jasper. No. My stomach hurts a lot. I can't know what happened. I was just eating the fruit that was under the queen's window, and all of a sudden I had this horrible stomach ache. It couldn't have been this horrible if it was just fruit. You just swallowed a seed, Jasper. Well, the servant understood what was going on and seized the duck named Jasper and took it away to the court Kitten'S. Don't you see how plump this duck is? He said. We should have it for dinner tonight. Yes, said the court cook. He pinched the duck to see how fat it was, and the duck was immediately cut open and began to be plucked. And what did they find inside of that duck's stomach? Why, the ring that had been missing from the queen's jewelry box. The servant went and handed it to the king. Here it is, sire, found inside of a duck's belly. The king was a bit embarrassed about the whole situation. My friend, said the king, you have served me faithfully and trustfully all these years. As a reward, you may have whatever you wish for in my kingdom. Say it, and I shall grant it. Well, the servant thought for a moment. Sire, I would like a horse. I would like to do a bit of traveling, to seek my fortunes in the world. Done. The king gave him his horse, and the young man rode off down the lane, and as he was riding along, he happened to overhear a sound. Help! Help! He looked down and saw that he was riding next to a stream where a pipe jutted out. Help! He looked inside the pipe and saw 3 little fish who had gotten caught inside of it when the water was higher, but now that the water had sunk down, they couldn't get back out. Help! Well, he knew exactly what they wanted, and he reached his arm inside of the pipe and took out the 3 fish, dropping them safely back into the stream. We will remember you, said the 3 fish, and we will repay you one day. And they swam off down the stream. Well, the servant didn't require payment. He was just happy to help. He got back on his horse and began to ride off down the lane. He had been riding for a while, a few days, when he happened to hear a very small voice. Well, I can't believe how clumsy these big people are with their horses and carts and with their big feet. They keep chomping on all of my people to death. Don't they realize they're right here in the road? Couldn't understand. It was a deserted country lane. He didn't see another person on it. And then he looked down and saw that he was riding right through a colony of ants scurrying all over the path. Oh, my apologies, said the servant, and he led his horse to the side and walked around the king of the ant people. I will remember you, said the king, and I will repay you. The servant continued riding off down the lane. He had been riding for a few more days when he heard a very loud voice say, Get out! Get out! Get out! We can't feed you anymore! He looked up into a tree and saw a nest of crows, and the mama crow was roughly pushing the baby crows out of the nest. I can't feed you anymore. You gotta feed yourself. We can't fly. We can't eat. We're going to starve, said the voices of the baby crows. Well, the kind-hearted servant immediately killed his own horse and chopped up the meat and fed it to the crows. We will remember you, sir, said the crows, as they gobbled up the horse. "We will repay you." Well, he had only his 2 feet to rely on now, and he walked off down the lane till he came to a town that was in a different kingdom than the one that he had come from. And he was talking with the people of the land when a crier rode through the town. "Hear ye, hear ye! Anybody who solves the king's challenge will marry the princess. Anybody who does not will die. If you want to marry the princess, go to the castle." Well, the servant thought it would be a fine thing to marry a princess, and so he made his way to the castle. He knocked on the castle door and said, "Your Majesty, I have come to solve your test. I've come to complete your challenge to marry the princess." "I know you," said the king. "You're the manservant of the king who lives next door to me, aren't you?" "I was, but he has set me free to find my fortune in the world." "So I see. Well, you'll have your turn." But the king wasn't too keen on letting a mere servant marry his daughter. So he made sure that the test would be challenging. He made sure that it would be impossible. He took the young man down to the seashore and plucked a ring off of his own finger. "I have about 1,000 of these. I can spare one." And threw it into the waves. And it sunk down and down and down. "Young man, if you want to beat this challenge, dive into the waves and bring back my ring. If you come back to the top and you don't have the ring, you must dive and return and dive and return and never stop till either you find my ring or..." And when he said, he meant executed. The young man was discouraged. He looked out over the waves, knowing the ring could be anywhere by now. It could be down in the darkest depths of the midnight zone. But he prepared. He had agreed to complete the challenge, and he was going to give it his best try. But before he even set a toe in the water, he heard a sound. "It's us, it's us, it's us." He looked down and saw 3 little fish. "Remember us? You rescued us. We have something for you." One of the fish opened his mouth, and sitting right inside was the king's ring. The young man reached his hand inside, thanked the 3 little fish, and handed the ring back to the king. "Here is your ring, your majesty. Now where is your princess?" When the princess heard about that, she was not too happy. She wasn't going to marry a mere serving boy, even if it was a serving boy of their neighbor. "There must be another test," she said. "This time I will set the challenge. This time the challenge will be that you must pick up every single grain of rice in the courtyard." "You keep your rice in the courtyard?" said the young man. "Course we don't." "What rice?" said the young man, and the princess picked up a bag of rice and spread it all around the courtyard, and picked up another bag of rice and spread every grain around the courtyard. "If there is a single grain of rice anywhere in this courtyard by tomorrow morning..." And she meant what everybody else meant when they went executed. Oh, well, the young man started furiously picking up grains of rice and stuffing them into the bag as quickly as he could, but even he could see he could be picking up rice for a week and still miss a single grain. But he worked as fast and as quick as he could, and as the light began to come up over the horizon, he was searching through the grass for more rice, but it seemed to have all vanished. "Oh, you remember me?" said a voice in the grass. He looked in the grass and saw the king of the ants. "Yep, I and my people just did this whole thing for you." You're welcome." "Thank you kindly," said the servant, and the ant scurried away. The princess went about on her hands and knees for hours, searching for just one grain of rice on the ground. But she couldn't find one. The sacks were full, as if she had never poured them out. "One more test," she said, and this time it would be impossible. "If you wish to marry me, you must bring me a golden apple." A golden apple? Yes, not a golden delicious apple, even though they are delicious. A golden apple from the tree that grows at the end of the world. Yes, the golden apple of contentment. As soon as you bring that to me, we will be wed. The young man had no idea where this tree might grow. He was beginning to have second thoughts about wanting to marry this particular princess. He trudged on his way, started walking and walking and walking, trying to find the end of the world where there might be a golden apple on a golden tree. And he had been walking for about an hour when he sat down for a break, for a bit of lunch and a drink of water, and into his lap, ding, fell a golden apple. He looked at the tree that he was sitting under, but it definitely wasn't an apple tree. "Remember us? Remember us?" said a voice. He looked up and saw 3 little crows. "We're the crows you helped, and we have flown to the end of the world and brought you back that apple. Thanks." "Thank you kindly," said the servant, and he scooped up the apple, and when he brought it back to the princess, she was so astonished she didn't have a thing to say. The two were wed, and the servant sliced the apple in half, giving half to his new bride. She ate it and immediately fell contentedly in love with the servant, and the two lived together in happiness ever after. The end. I am the story girl, and I do not approve of that princess. If I was advising that servant, I would tell him to find a different princess to marry, which I'm sure he would, because he was a very determined young man. This story has what we call the price of the bride in the story. And you'll see in other stories that we tell that very often the king is going to let anybody marry his daughter, anybody at all, as long as they complete a challenge, answer a question, tell a story, just like the story, The Endless Story, which was one of the first stories ever recorded. And also in the story of the Riddle King. There are lots of different stories where the king requests that a person complete a challenge before they can marry his daughter. But my favorite one is going to come up in a few months. It's called How Boots Befooled the King. If you had a price for you to be married, or someone that you want to marry off, what would you set as a challenge, as a test, or as a price? Thank you for joining the story today. If you've enjoyed the story, please like and subscribe. If you're new to my world of stories, I post a story every single Tuesday. Sometimes there's extra stories, and I've got some extra stories coming up on Facebook and Instagram. So you can follow me on there, The Story Girl. Remember that story with an I. Bye.